Hey, Jagger, Representative Jerry Conley, the Democrat from Virginia, he used a great, clever, engaging ploy just earlier today in Congress to expose Trump's culpability for the Doha withdrawal. Now, in the video that we have for you today, Connolly makes his terrific points by using a bit of Socratic sensibility, feigned confusion, and a twinkle of Irish wit to underscore who was actually behind the Afghan withdrawal and the true events, leading up to it. Now, as you'll see, Representative Connolly, feigned confusion, well, that focuses his inquiry, just earlier today, on fact, not political passion, and especially pay attention and follow his very clever navigation and revelation of the deadly details of the Trump administration's foul fingerprints that pointed toward the inevitable Doha disaster, and his own previous concerns to that end. Well, the clever Irishman from Virginia, Jerry Connolly, has the floor.
I'd like to put a picture up which seems to suggest, Mr. Secretary, that the Republican narrative is correct about you. There you are with a prominent Taliban negotiator. Do our tech people have that picture? Well, I have it here. Isn't that you with the Taliban negotiator, Mr. Secretary?
I'm afraid I can't see the picture, but I'm not aware of having spent any time with a Taliban negotiator.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's Secretary Pompeo. Was he your predecessor in the Biden administration as Secretary of State? In the Biden administration?
No, he was my predecessor in the previous administration, the Trump administration.
The Trump administration. And there he is in Doha with the chief Taliban negotiator. I guess I got that wrong. Well, Mr. Secretary, all things seem to flow from Doha. Secretary Pompeo and President Trump appointed a chief negotiator on behalf of the United States for the negotiations in Doha. What was his name?
Zal Khalilzad.
Ambassador Khalilzad, and he, of course, testified before this committee, and I can remember an exchange with him in which I expressed deep concern about the direction of the U.S. posture and the ramifications with allied Afghans who had worked for us or worked with us, and women. And he kind of brushed them off at the time. Tell us about the details of the agreement he forged in Doha. What were the chief elements of that? Concisely, if you would.
Yeah, in essence, the agreement provided for this. It provided that the Taliban would not use Afghan soil to attack us or our interests.
Right. No.
It would start an intra-Afghan negotiation, and as part of that negotiation, there would be discussion of a ceasefire and a political roadmap for the future of Afghanistan. And during the time between the agreement and the commitment that we made as part of the agreement to leave Afghanistan by May 31st.
So a firm date was set
Yes.
for all U.S. troops to get out. Is that correct?
All U.S. troops were to be out by May 31st. In the meantime, 5,000 prisoners were released from Taliban prisoners.
And as Mr. Sherman points out, among those 5,000 were terrorists, fighters, and people who returned to the battlefield against the Afghan government, which allegedly we were supporting at the time. Now, speaking of that Afghan government, were they in Doha at the negotiating table as equal partners?
They were not.
They were not?
They were not.
Why were they excluded? That's the government we were supporting.
I can't answer that. I wasn't there at the time, but they were not.
Well, if the government we're supporting is not allowed to have a voice at the peace negotiations where a deal was in fact agreed to by the United States, could that conceivably undermine confidence in that government and by that government in itself in terms of its future?
Yes, and indeed, I think General McKenzie has testified to exactly that point, that Doha created a tremendous crisis in confidence and about the future for the Afghan government and presumably to some extent for the Afghan security forces themselves.
Could it also have a morale effect on the Afghan military that we were training and equipping to, in fact, fight the Taliban?
Yes, it could.
So here we are cutting a deal with Taliban. while at the same time asking the Afghan military and the Afghan government to resist. Is that correct?
Correct.
That sounds like a contradiction in diplomatic policy to me. That's kind of hard to follow, and it seems to me that we, by agreeing to that in the Trump years with Secretary Pompeo, your predecessor, and Ambassador Khalilzad, we actually set in motion an untenable but probably irrevocable kind of, folding of events. Is that a fair statement, do you think?
Once the deadline was there, all troops out by May 31st of 2021, and as part of that, an agreement from the signing of Doha to that date not to attack U.S. forces, but with the obvious conclusion to be drawn from that, that if that deadline was not respected, the Taliban would resume its attacks on U.S. forces, on partner forces, and its attacks on the cities.
So in other words, Mr. Secretary, we cut a deal to get out and cut our losses at the expense of the Afghan government, the Afghan military, and ultimately the Afghan people. And that was all set in motion before you took the oath of office or President Biden took the oath of office.
Well,
Is that a fair statement?
I think that's where the Doha agreement led.
I thank you, and I yield back.
Representative Jerry Conley, he was just recently diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Now, in the same spirit as we saw in that clip above, he offered these thoughts about that diagnosis and his future. Cancer can be tough, but so am I, he said, and I will attack this the only way I know how, with Irish fight and humor. 'Tis what is right, Representative Conley. Godspeed.